excited about today's episode. This brings me a little closer to home for me. And I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And so right now we have Dr. Lau, we have Jeffrey Chow, and Charles Chen. And so Dr. Lau, I think we'll go ladies first. So would you be able to introduce yourself to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Winnie Lau. I am currently calling you from North Carolina. I'm a intensive care unit doctor and a neurologist. In terms of my background, I am first generation American born Chinese. My father was from Mainland China, Guangzhou area, and my mother was from Hong Kong. And what else do I want? So I grew up actually in the San Francisco Bay Area in a pretty heavily populated Chinese area and culture, and kind of found myself relocating around the US and experiencing different cultures over time throughout my medical training, starting with medical school. And so I've most recently found myself here in North Carolina for the last 5 years.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Lau. Are your parents still here in the US?
So my mother is in California, still living in the Bay Area. And unfortunately, I lost my father a number of years ago. But,
I'm sorry.
But my whole family is still over there.
All right. Thank you. Charles, let's go with you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Dr. Lau, please come back to California soon, and we could have boba or something like that. Yes, like he said, my name is Charles Chen. I am currently a senior project manager for Healthline Media, which is I'm going to say this a lot, but the #1 health information website right now in the U.S. Prior to that, my background was actually in organ and tissue donation for many years. I did that for about 10 years. I did multiple stuff: organ allocation, tissue donation, hospital development, and then learning and development also. My cultural background, I actually was born in Guangzhou province, and immigrated to the U.S. when I was 2 years old, and came to California. I have never left. I actually came to school here. I graduated from UC Berkeley. I started my career here working for Donor Network West, the organ procurement organization over here in Northern California. And currently I live in Dublin, California, which is a city in the East Bay area. And my parents are also here in California, and I haven't left since. I did many trips up to Ohio because my wife went to school at OSU. So it was good to kind of see the environment of Ohio and how it's slowly seeing an increase of an Asian population, and even an increase of Chinese population up in Ohio and just many other states, I think, around the United States. So just so glad to be here, Heidi. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Charles. I lived in Dublin when I lived up in San Francisco.
Oh, I did? Okay.
It's a nice, safe, quiet place.
Yeah, definitely. We love it. So.
All right. Thank you. And Jeffrey.
Hi. So my name is Jeffrey Chow, and I am coming from Virginia Beach, Virginia. I'm the clinical services manager for LifeNet Health currently. I've worked for LifeNet for about the past 20 years as a transplant coordinator. My background, I guess, my cultural background is I grew up in New York City, born and raised there, first generation Chinese American. My parents are from Mainland China. My great grandparents are there. On my mother's side, they migrated to Korea. So my mom actually grew up in Korea instead. But both are from Mainland China, from the Qingdao area. And they actually moved up here to be closer to the grandkids. They don't care about us. So they're still both around and kicking in, cooking lots of food for the grandkids.
Kids can only do bad things, and then grandkids can only do perfect things.
Yes.
That is culture tip #1.
My wife's she's, I guess, French Polish. She's a mutt, but she's Caucasian, and she's just starting to learn that And we've been married for, oh God, like 15 years now.
Well, thank you for all of you for making the time on this Friday afternoon. And so I learned something already. Is this something that's okay for other people to use, or is this really only something that people from China use with each other, the ABC term that you just taught me? So what does ABC mean?
So ABC is something that my parents and their families have always told me that it's American-born Chinese. So it's basically that we've assimilated the American culture more than, I guess, our Chinese heritage. So, but I mean, growing up in New York, there's a huge Asian population there, which I was still involved with. Went to, of course, they put me into a Chinese school to learn, read, and write. I was not one of those studious Chinese sons. I kind of blossomed late in life, but I was the problem child, I guess. So, but that is just it's just a term that my family has used, kind of a not necessarily a bad term per se, but just a term that they use, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, I think it probably goes beyond your family, because certainly I think we all kind of refer to it, and I've been called an ABC. And do I take it as derogatory? Not really. I know that, like, if I'm visiting China or Hong Kong, and I'm meeting up with relatives and I get one of those, oh, you're so ABC. I know that there's a negative connotation to it when I'm there. But here in the US, if someone says that and I go, well, yes, I am in fact an American who was born Chinese.
Yeah. Excellent.
I think maybe it's a first generation thing for us. Like we said, there's kind of a negative connotation when you're in China or Taiwan or Hong Kong in regards to that. But for me, it was just like, yeah, I kind of embrace it. You know, I grew up with both cultures, and you know, like you said earlier, we make it, you know, ourselves, and how we grow up.
Mm-hmm. So
I think for me it's a little bit different because I was born in China and I came here when I was 2 years old. So a lot of people assume that I'm an ABC. So I don't take it offensive, but I just, you know, let them know why I actually wasn't born here. I consider myself a Chinese American, but I wouldn't consider you to use the word or term ABC. But like in our culture, in Cantonese, something similar to ABC is 投居仔. So like it means like you're very, very Americanized. You were born here. When you speak any Cantonese or Mandarin, you have like American accent or something like that. So that I get that a lot. I don't take that as offensive, but it just means that you were born in America or born somewhere else, but you grew up being very Americanized, I guess. So I'm sure Wendy, you've got it before too, right, Dr. Lau?
Yeah, I've heard it, and of course, please, both of you, everybody, call me Winnie. That's fine. But yeah, as soon as you said it, it just rang bells, which is why I laughed, because I've definitely been called out as well.
So actually, I was just thinking, well, I learned a little Mandarin, not really. That sounds almost like I can have a conversation. I learned a couple of phrases or words in Mandarin when I lived in Singapore. So I learned the ni hao ma, right, which is how are you? How do I say welcome in Mandarin, assuming you guys speak Mandarin? I know, Charles, you said you speak Mandarin and Cantonese. How do I say welcome?
Welcome. It's so there is a word for it, but I don't think we usually really say it like in my culture. Like welcome in Cantonese is 歡迎, and then in Mandarin is 欢迎. But when you see someone, it seems like we don't really use that phrase a lot. Surprisingly for my family, we actually says, "Oi, hello." Like we love using the phrase way, like it's a why. Like in my culture we love adding like weird like sounds after a phrase or before a phrase, like homoa, like dima, like we love doing that. So we've never really used welcome, but we actually add a lot of like English within like a greeting or something like that. So
kind of like in
culture.
Singapore, they would call that Singlish.
Yeah.
You mixing the English in.
yeah, which is really interesting. And I thought it was just being my parents, living here for so many years, and me living here for so many years. When I went back to Hong Kong and Guangzhou, a lot of people in Guangzhou and Hong Kong also do the same too, like "Wai lei hoa" or "Wai hello." Like it's pretty interesting. So
way hello.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. Maybe it is sort of a reflection of culture, because I remember when you asked that, it took me a while to come up with it. And I speak Cantonese. And so when Charles said it, I was like, oh yeah, that's the word. But I also never really heard that word growing up. I learned it like in some formal context somewhere. And the only time you really hear it, it's sort of a strange thing. It's almost like there's no real word or concept of welcome. Like there's, it just comes with like, it's more like, hey, how you doing? Not like, welcome, come into my home and like share my space. The only time I'd ever heard funying, which is welcome, is like when you're at a wedding and everything's like really formal and they're like, please come to my wedding celebration and like, witness our glory and prosperity. That's a big thing in Chinese culture, is witness our glory and prosperity. And that's whenever I would hear it, was just in these very grand wedding events. I don't know if you guys had the same experience.
Yeah. Once Charles said it, I was like, oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, wow, I haven't heard that in a very long time. My Mandarin is not very good because there's not a lot of Chinese people around here. But yeah, I guess literal translation would be, I guess quick come in is the greeting that my parents would say or growing up.
Like,
so how do you say it, Jeff?
like 进来吧, 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 你好, 进来吧. Yeah, like so, come in.
It's like come in.
Yeah, come in, 进来吧. Yeah. And it's
like,
funny.
What is it like here? We cheer, like go, right? In Chinese, it's like what is it? It's give gas, basically.
Yeah, 加油, 加油, 加油. Yeah. Add oil. That's what we translated. Yeah.
All right. So what is appropriate terminology for referencing somebody who is Chinese from mainland China, or would you just say they're Chinese?
I guess, and I think it's just because mainland China is so big. Right. I think like even Haiti was saying, there's Mandarin, Cantonese, but if you want to go even deeper, there's when he's saying, like Toisanese, there's Shanghainese, there's Suzhounese. So there's a lot of like language. So how I usually do it is that, hi, you're Chinese, right? Which part of China are you from? And then I will kind of ask them. Then they're like, oh, I'm from Shanghai, or I'm from Suzhou, and I'm like, oh, okay, so you're from Suzhou. So usually I will ask them, they like where they're actually from, and I'll usually ask them which one will they prefer. Are you okay for me calling you Chinese, or do you want me to call you from where you're actually from, like from Guangzhou or from like Shanghai? I know from my culture that's what we usually do.
That's a good tip. Great. And is there an inappropriate way that people refer to Chinese people that is actually offensive from your perspective here in the US?
I still bristle. I kind of like, especially living in different regions, I've become, not accepting, but just realizing that people have had different levels of exposure, but I still tend to bristle at Oriental. That one still kind of gets me. And then I try to correct and make more specific and things like that. And otherwise, there are much more derogatory ways that people have referred to Chinese people that I really can say I haven't heard since school days, when kids were just trying to be mean for the sake of being mean.
Right.
I think people have come to realize like a lot of those terms are unacceptable. And then I just want to piggyback on something that Charles said. Like, I'm always a little careful. I've had a lot of experience with people asking me if I'm Chinese through many, many roundabout ways, like as I move through the Midwest and the South. And it usually starts with one of those like, oh, where are you from? Kind of
New York.
Vague questions. And then you start honing into what the real answer or what the real question is. And I typically say, are you asking what my ethnicity is from? Because I'm American, I'm here, born in America, but my ethnicity is Chinese. And then that kind of opens up a discussion. Oh, so you're not from China? I was like, no, but my parents were, and this is the region that my parents were from.
Yeah, great point. Now back to your point of the Oriental verbiage making you bristle. Can you maybe explain briefly why is that something that kind of does not sit so well, just so our audience understands?
I think it's encompassing such a large group of people. And it's oftentimes when that's said, I feel like there isn't an effort to drill down into the individuality. It's much like I think many other races would feel some offense towards being lumped in a very homogenous group on account of the color of my hair and the color of my skin. I much rather would be asked, or even just said in a slightly different way, like, hey, you appear to have some Oriental features. Are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Something that kind of recognizes the individualities of those cultures, because that's what this is all about, right? Is that we have very distinct cultures, despite similarities of physical features.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for expanding upon that. Now, do you believe that all Chinese people who were raised on mainland China have commonly shared values? I understand that Jeff and Winnie, you were both raised here, you were born in the US and raised here, but your parents had that background. Do you think there are, having met, I'm sure you've all met other Chinese people, do you feel that there are commonly shared values with which you are raised?
Well, I think there are some basic ones, but I think it's just like being, the United States. So, me being from New York and being a transplant to the South, there are commonalities there being American, but there are also very much differences. So I think it's that similar in regards to Chinese culture and where you're born. My parents were born in northern China. So it's a little bit different than the culture in the southern China or in the big cities. Like recently, especially with Shanghai being very much modernized, the culture in that big city is very different than the rest of China, potentially with it being still very much rural and not as modern.
Do you have an example of something like that?
Offhand, not really, I guess. For me, I don't really notice it that much just because I don't have a lot of Chinese friends here. Maybe Charles or Winnie can elaborate on that, but that's what I feel is that, China's so big, and I know with my parents, being from northern China, it's different than being from southern China. just from my interaction with them.
I agree with Jeff. I think I think that's true. That it could be so different because, like I said, China is so big. Just being where you're actually from, and just just as simple as cuisine habits, right? People in like Sichuan, they love to eat spicy stuff just because the weather there is usually really cold. And then like I think it's funny when everyone thinks of dim sum, they think it's Chinese. And I remember I had a friend that was from Sichuan, and they're like, "Oh, does your parents know how to make dim sum?" And I think my friend was like, "Well, I'm actually not from Canton because that's actually where dim sum was originated from. The dim sum that people knows right now, because I think like xiaolongbao, that's also considered dim sum too, but that's actually from Shanghai." To add into your question though, Heidi, I think like one thing that we can agree, and correct me if you're wrong, Jeff or Wendy, but there are some similarities, like how you have to be obedient and you have to really care for and be polite to your elders, right? Just that situation where you always have to listen to your elders. Elders are usually in that situation. Do you not agree, Jeff? Or
My mom is 4'8".
uh-huh.
And I am still scared of her.
Yeah. So
wow, she's 4'8" and you're 6.
yeah, that's so,
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah. So I think like that part, that part, the
Yeah.
obedience and just respecting elders, is something that I think is pretty common in among mainland China. I think it's just how we were, raised. Just like the opportunity when you have an elderly figure come into your house, you always, in my culture, we always have to like make sure that we're bringing out tea for them and we're showing our respect to them and stuff like that. So
yeah, there isn't really this concept of a teenage rebellious phase. That's like when we're talking about like teenage rebellious phase, it's like, ooh, I gotta be like, like, or maybe I went to go hang out with my friends that one time, as opposed to, but I would agree. There's a lot of obedience type of stuff. There's a lot of honor your parents, listen to your parents because your parents are wise, which I agree with in most scenarios of parenting. And but then there's also this expectation down the line of, and you will care for your parents, like it's like unspoken that at some point, like the parents will probably move in with you. And that it's
Guilty.
not a role reversal. It's not you become the boss of your parents because they came to live with you. It's they're coming to live with you and they're still reigning over your house.
Yeah, I'm actually in the process the next couple of years of moving my parents in. My dad's 86, so he's kind of up there in age.
So when they move in, then you follow their rules. It's not that they're living with you now.
Yeah, pretty much.
At this point, you kind of have to start following their rules. If they say something, that's what will go. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's kind of yes, okay, whatever you say, and then just kind of move them. We're hoping to have them in a separate wing. My dad has basically gone deaf, so he turns the TV on at like 60 volume. So we've tried giving a hearing aid or headphones, and he's just like, "Oh, that's for old people."
Okay. Dr. Yang, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you making the time.
For having me.
We had everybody introduce themselves, so would you be so kind to introduce yourself to
Yes.
the audience, whatever you want them to know about you?
Sure. Yes, and thank you for having me. And I sincerely apologize about the tardiness. Usually Friday afternoons in the Children's Hospital where we work is not typically too busy, but of course the one day I decided to schedule something, it was. So that is what happens with life. So my name is Jojo Yang. My legal name is what my parents gave me when I was born, which is Qianzhou. It is spelled according to the romanticized version of Chinese characters. So it's not usually pronounced correctly, but I just historically have gone by Jojo. And I am a pediatric neurologist specialist in epilepsy. So I see mostly children with seizures and developmental delays. And that is a little bit about me.
All right. Thank you so much, Jojo, for your time. And I'm sorry it's been a bit of a busy day for you, but we appreciate that you could make the time. So we were just talking about commonly shared values. The question was, do you believe that all Chinese people from mainland China have commonly shared values? And so the conversation was very much about, at a minimum, while there can be differences in the different regions, at a minimum, the importance of respect, being obedient, being respectful, especially towards elders, anybody who is elder. And my question was going to be, does that also apply to, in a professional setting, to people who are maybe considered in a higher position than you as well? Is that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I started my career working in hospitals, I was raised to, always trust physicians and always respect physicians. So, it's really hard. It was hard for me when I had physicians that are like, don't call me by my last name. Don't call me doctor something. Call me by my first name. It took me a while to do that because I was raised by my parents that because physicians, they've gone through so much training, they know so much, they're just so well respected that you should call them by, Dr. So-and-so. And I think that it really took me a while. I remember when I took to a transplant surgeon and she said, don't call me by my last name, call me by my first name. It took me like at least 3 months to kind of change from calling her by doctor, her last name, and then to her first name. So I think like just, hierarchy and just respect is something that I know my family takes really dear of, and my parents have always told me to do so. So
yeah, I think that's the same with teachers in the Chinese culture. It was kind of different growing up here and then going to visit family over there. I have an uncle and aunt who are both teachers, so they're treated over there just like doctors with that same respect and prestige. Whereas here in America, they're really not. So I was always, to this day, I can't call a teacher by their first name. Even if they're younger than me, I just can't do it, just because of the respect that my parents have taught me about that profession.
Yeah. Kind of like taking that point home is that typically in Chinese language, when you're talking about your teacher, you're calling them sifu, which means master. It's like, that's the word for master, someone who's mastered something. And so that's sort of that level of respect that those kind of professions garner.
So is there, whether it's with your parents or with a teacher or a physician or whomever is in kind of a position of power as such, or elder, is there a way you can respectfully disagree with them, or is that something you would not do?
We're all laughing because we're scared of the prospect.
Yeah.
I'm scared of the consequences.
I think there is any consequences, but then your mom and dad will be like, wow, you dare to do that? Like, why? Is there a reason? I think you have to have a really good rationale in order for you to do that. So I think in my job, it was so hard doing hospital development because, seeing the physician and talking to them, sometimes there are situations where you might not will agree with a physician, and you just have to be in that mindset of not having your mom be like, well, wait, are you there to talk back to a physician? Like, really? Like, are you there to like, argue with them or even, have a conversation with them? So I think like it kind of allowed me as I was growing up to kind of migrate a little bit with the American culture. But once in a while, when I'm talking back or having like a conversation with like a teacher or someone with a higher aspect, I have my mom and my dad in the back of my head saying, Charles, are you really going to do that? Are you really going to do that? Like, so I guess like when he said that's why we all laughed, because do we dare to actually do that? And I think because we actually grew up in the U.S., some of that situation allows us to be in that situation where we will do that, but we will have our mom and dad in the back of our head as we do any of that kind of aspect of that. So.
Right. I think the reaction said it all.
It's almost like having, like in the cartoons, you have the angel and the devil, except for you have your parents and they're both, kind of yelling at you.
Don't do it. So in a Chinese family, who's typically the decision maker for bigger decisions, I guess? Or is that family dependent?
In the out, like when it's with people that are not part of your family, it seems to be your dad, but usually when it's within the family, it's your mom. So I think just in especially in our culture, and I think just knowing my families, you are always supposed to give face to the man of the family, the oldest man in the family, but usually the one that holds the money, the one that makes the decision in the household is usually the mother. So I know like my dad will usually be outside, have a lot of good face, and what faces mean is that you always want to respect the man of the family. So when you're outside, when the man talks, the women usually don't want to talk as much. But then when you go back to inside, I know my mom is the one that usually makes the decision, but I don't know if it's the
So to
same.
outsiders, it's the man of the household, but in the home, it's mom. It's kind of like that line from that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where she says, the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and she'll turn it in whatever direction.
I guess it's probably family specific.
Yeah.
And personality specific.
Yeah.
I think that might be the more general situation. But I don't think, like, personally in my family, like my mom is not anyone about any air. She cares about face as well. And she cared always about keeping my father's face, like, but I don't think anyone had the illusion that my father was in control.
Yeah, that's, I'd always thought it was just kind of my family. But yeah, my dad's more of a hands-on type, and my mom was always more about the household, running the finances and investing and things of that nature. So I know when we were in the house, my dad got reprimanded a lot. But
I think
when we were out, it was really my dad was the kind of the figurehead of the family, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I think it's family specific a little bit, but in terms of actually for healthcare, like medical decision making, it's interesting that it's sort of like the senior member of the family, but not the person that's sick. So there was a movie that came out recently, I think last year, with Awkwafina. Yeah, the Farewell.
Awkwafina, yeah.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting to watch it as a Chinese American because it was basically exactly what happened to my grandmother who lives in mainland China, and what happened with my family when she got colon cancer, and my father, who is the eldest son of hers, was sort of like the main decision maker. My grandfather's no longer, had died a couple years before that, but it's sort of like the eldest, but not the person that's sick, because you want to keep that information from them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you kind of bring up an interesting point So let's kind of talk about that before I forget about it, because I was going to ask you about that movie, you know, if that rang true to you in terms of if a family member is sick, because here in the US, of course, it's very much individualistic society, focus on, well, that patient is the one who will be told, and it's up to them if they want to share it with the rest of the family. But in The Farewell, we see the flip. So this movie called The Farewell with Aquafina as the main character, here as I think she was American-born Chinese, or she was at least came at a very young age, and now she's grappling with the fact that when going back home, that if everybody in the family knew about the grandmother's illness, but grandma wasn't being told that she had a brain tumor. So is that typical? Is that kind of that respect piece that you're talking about, is trying to protect them from feeling sadness and having to deal with this devastating diagnosis, and kind of along the lines of ignorance is bliss as such, and keeping it with the rest of the family? Is that typical, or was that more for the movie?
When I watched the movie, I felt like it was a little extreme in that regard of, you know, hiding a diagnosis from somebody. It happens to a certain degree in terms of like, how severe is this? And actually very recently, I kind of encountered this same, something along the similar lines with my mom. You know, I'm an intensive care unit doctor, so I'm constantly thinking about advanced directives and code status and things like that. And as I shared, I lost my father a number of years ago. And so, you know, I've definitely talked about this kind of stuff with my mom before, in the context of shortly after he passed. And I just kind of re-upped the conversation recently with her, more thinking about as her risk of stroke grows higher and her ability for independence will be lower. And I was really trying to do this very Western thing, which is like, tell me what you want so that when I have to say it for you, I will know. And she really just went very deferential on it. She just said, you're going to know what to do. And that was the end of the discussion. She's like, just, you guys will make the right decision. And like, wouldn't say the words, wouldn't really express herself. And I had to really, really dig. And ultimately I do know those types of things, but that was my first real experience with my own mother, who, like I said, was like the powerhouse of our house and very just outspoken and just pulling this deferential card out about healthcare. And that was the first time. My father did that. But for the most part, that was a lot of his personality. And then, you know, I think in the mix of all of this, of course, is as a physician, of course, they're going to pull the deferential card to me. And just assuming that I'm going to know best because of that professional level that I've achieved.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is the approach in that movie of the physician talking to the family first before talking to the patient and letting the family decide when they want to tell the patient. Is that a common approach, and how would you reconcile that as such, working here in the US with maybe a very traditional Chinese family? Is that something, thinking about healthcare professionals who might be watching this, is that something that maybe they need to keep in mind? Because it is, in a sense, counter-legal, right, from a US perspective. But if we're trying to provide culturally competent care, is that something we have to take into consideration? Is that something we should ask the family, or how do you navigate that?
Well, I know with my family, I mean, my parents have been here a long time, but they still kind of speak very broken English and don't understand like the medical field as much. And they know I'm in the medical field. So a lot of times they'll just, they'll take all this paper out that they've, gotten from the doctors and have me read it or have me call their physician. and and have them explain it to me. So I've had that experience, which I think a lot of people will get, especially from the older generation. They don't understand a lot of those medical terms, so though they rely on their kids. It's funny how you guys say the movie Aquafina or Farewell. Like I've kind of experienced it the opposite with my grandparents. I was really close with my mom's grandparents. My father's parents died back in the war, so like they kept it from me, and I just found out from one of my cousins that my grandmother actually had Alzheimer's disease. I didn't know that until recently. And I was like, what? And my parents or my mom wouldn't let me go visit them when they were sick. It's like, no, don't worry, it's okay. You don't need to spend your money. I'll go see them, which was kind of upsetting to me.
So would you suggest the best course for anybody who works in a hospital be to just ask each family to just say, in terms of sharing the diagnosis, who should I be sharing this with? And then have each family kind of dictate that? Would that be the safer way to go versus making an assumption one way or another?
Yeah, I think so. I think to add to what Wendy said, I think the movie was a little bit extreme. I think in my situation, a lot of times what happens is that they won't give them the full details. So if it's like very extreme, meaning if, for example, someone maybe has stage 4, cancer, maybe they'll be like, okay, we have to decide as a family, should we tell them it's stage 4 or should we tell them it is cancer? And guess what? Doctor just says, you should do chemotherapy, you should do these kind of treatment, but they don't really disclose the full diagnosis of them in terms of, kind of not like hiding it from them, but they just feel that if they hear too much of it, it will cause their, mental status and their emotional status to not be the best. So I think no, it's true, Aiden. I think like asking the family, because I think they will usually maybe even sometimes decide as a family what to do, especially like my grandma passed away about 2 years ago, and my mom has 9 brothers and sisters, and it's really like a family decision on what to do next. Usually there's like the older brother or the older sister is usually one of the ones that might make the final decision, but they usually want to know together on what to do next steps.
Yeah, I think certainly the movie, and you might have talked about this before I joined, but Mainland China is a very heterogeneous continent in terms of multiple minority ethnicities, and certainly not there are obviously differences in culture just across regions of China, and I think the movie was actually very and certainly didn't ring true with a lot of people, but I think it did represent a portion of the population in terms of grappling with this difference between American and Mainland China culture. And I think some of it has to do, so like Charles mentioned, it has to do with the emotional mind having some effect on the physical body. So in that sense, like your thoughts have power, and your thoughts can manifest things in your body, which, there's lots of understanding of that in alternative medicine and stuff. So I think it is it does make sense to me. And in my medical school training we had, and it's also not a practice that's exclusive to Chinese people or culture. There are other cultures, as Winnie probably knows from her intensive care daily practice, but there's other cultures that do practice the same. And so I do think that asking first, what they want to hear and who they should tell, especially in the case of a terminal diagnosis, that is very appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And the key is, which is my big mantra always, is ask. Find out. Everybody's so different. And I love that you pointed out that even just because somebody identifies as Chinese from mainland China doesn't mean that they're going to have one set approach to this topic. And so it's really important to find out for each family what is important to you, who should I be talking to, who's making the decisions here, and just kind of recognize that that's going to be different based on whomever you're dealing with. And I love that you pointed out it's not coming from a malicious place or a place of control or power. It's really to protect that person who's sick, right, from an extra burden of having to deal with more information than maybe they need to right now. Just like you said, knowing the power of the impact of your thoughts on your physiological state.
And I think for the people where it might make you feel uneasy, this idea of not telling the patient's diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like the patient not being a part of that shared decision making, that can feel, that's very counter to the way we practice medicine in the US. And so I can relate to that sort of moral turmoil. The kind of flip way that I would look at it is, as Jojo was saying, really actually even talking to that person with the translator and saying, I have some information about your medical diagnosis. Is that information that you want me to share with you and only with you or entirely with you? How much detail do you want to know? Or is there someone else you would prefer that I talk to about it? Mm-hmm. Because like Jeffrey was saying, most likely his family would be like, Dr. Jeffrey, like they'll tell me whatever I need to know. And that's okay. That's actually them consenting to that process.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Excellent point. So would you say that there are commonly shared health care beliefs amongst Chinese people in terms of healthcare in itself? Are there commonly shared beliefs there?
All right. Everybody believes in hot air, right? In Yeet Hay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is like this one sort of, it's almost hard to explain. It's almost like humors. It's about the balance of your body and
the yin and yang.
Have enough hot and cold elements, and I think that at least the majority of Chinese people I encounter do still firmly hold some of this in terms of just their normal health maintenance is keeping this sort of hot and cold balance, this yin yang, kind of flow through their system. I have yet to meet a Chinese person who didn't believe in that, myself and my husband included.
Okay. So even if you were raised by Chinese parents but were grown up in the US, it's probably something that you might still hold true to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think if I were to translate it onto something that's like very Western, it's like saying spicy food will give you reflux.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's basically saying that, and they also look at if that person is hong dai or yi dai. So they will say like, is your body mostly towards the hot side, or is it mostly towards the cold side? Because if it's mostly toward the cold side, you're supposed to eat less cold stuff. So you could eat, but if you're more towards the hot side, you could eat more cold stuff because you want to balance it out. So like when he's saying it's really about the yin and yang, finding that middle balance point for your hot and cold. And I think it's like when you're a little kid, when you love to eat chips, right? Your mom was like, don't eat so much chips. Like it's very hot for you. It's not good for your body. Or you know, if you drink too much, you know, soda or eat too much ice cream, like it's very cold. Don't eat too much of that. So if you do eat it, you have to eat not too much of each of everything. So kind of have like a balanced diet, basically. It's just their way of saying having a balanced diet.
How can you tell if you're hot or cold? Is there a way you can tell that yourself?
There apparently in the Chinese medicine part, there is a way. Like you could, by looking at your tongue, you could really your tongue could tell you a lot. If you go see like a Chinese herbal medicine individual, so they could tell by your tongue, by the color and by how it looks, you could tell if you're yi dai or hong dai, so like, or you hot and cold. But I'm not the medical expert. We have Jojo and Wendy here. I don't know how much they believe that in terms of like the Chinese, medicine part. So but I know like when I go see a Chinese, medicine doctor, that's what they will tell me if I'm yi dai or hong dai, so if I'm cold or hot. They look at your tongue a lot.
Yeah, and I think in terms of cultural competence, for anyone interacting with a mainland Chinese person in a healthcare setting, there's definitely a lot of internalization of traditional Chinese medicine concepts, like this hot and cold concept. It's like stuff that you, like Charles said, you hear in everyday just life as you're growing up. So like, I guess in English, it could be like, you're going to catch a cold if you go out in the rain. But, American culture, that's a similar concept. And I think that there are a lot of internalizations of traditional Chinese medicine aspects that people maintain into their daily life. And a lot of that has actually aside from, being a Western medicine trained physician, I have incredible respect for traditional Chinese medicine. I think it's a completely separate type of medicine, but based on thousands of years of knowledge that actually does work. And so I think that especially in like a terminal diagnosis situation, working with a patient with traditional Chinese medicine or alternative medicine avenues is really important to me personally.
So what I'm hearing you suggest and recommend is if you're working with a Chinese family, asking them, is there certain expectations that they have in terms of their treatment that may go beyond what is considered Western treatment, anything that they would like to incorporate that would provide some value, versus kind of finding ways of negotiating that and compromising through that versus just trying to lord over Western medicine.
I think it's important to ask if there is something like that. And that's not something that's commonly done. Actually, as I'm saying it, it's really a practice that I should probably take up with all cultures, because it's not restricted to Chinese culture. Many cultures have their healthcare
alternative beliefs.
Exactly.
Like Native American culture, Indian culture in terms of Ayurvedic medicine. It is.
And it is very important, especially towards the end of life. Many Chinese people do kind of cling to these last bits of, would this herbal medicine help? Or, I would like to try acupuncture. And things like that. I can even say so for my own family members, multiples of my own family members, in which at their end of life, I negotiated the use and trial of Chinese medicine and Eastern medicines, because that was really kind of psychologically important for my family members to do that.
Yeah. And going back to also that, like you just said, the psychological impact and what Jojo said earlier on about the thought process, right? That is all part of that treatment course as well. That I think in the Western medicine, we don't pay as much attention to. Are there barriers towards Western medicine as such that could come up? Are there certain concerns in when they're going through being treated in the US and Western medicine? Are there certain concerns and barriers that might occur, and how do we best overcome those?
I think you just mostly have to watch out and be aware if there's mixing of medicines, just like in kind of any scenario. My experience with most Chinese people is there isn't an adverse kind of feeling about following Western medicine. There isn't like an opposition to it. But I think where you have to get really careful is whether you find out that they're taking this tea that also causes a liver function problem when combined with this Lipitor. So cultural competency of knowing what kind of holistic or supplemental medications might be there in the background is pretty important just for patient care. And then you have to ride the very fine line of not saying don't do that, but just making the best recommendation that you can that balances that person's health and respects their culture.
So what I heard you say overall, that there's not an aversion to Western medicine in general, but just being aware that there might be other self-treatments happening that could potentially conflict with treatments that you're prescribing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think where there's a huge Asian population or Chinese population, like in New York, Chinatown, there are a lot of, the herbalists and, they'll give you these concoctions, try this herb with this herb, and they mix it and grind it. I think you have to be careful with that. I know with my experience, at least in Virginia, where I'm at, they don't have that. But my mom and dad have kind of explored the internet and gotten stuff for certain things. So, like my dad still, for some reason, believes in this ginseng infused alcohol that he has to have, and he has to make, and he has to have a shot of it every day or something. And I'm like, okay, Dad, sure. But
I have this vision of my future, in a perfect world in my future practice, or in my second or third career, if I tried to learn Chinese medicine. I just think it would be so wonderful if we could just, really marry the two.
Yeah.
Because I think there's lots of wisdom in ancient cultures with regards to this. But as you were asking that question, I was thinking about a little bit more about the hot and cold thing when he said. So I just wanted to share this example is postpartum, after giving birth. I think, American culture traditionally would want ice water for hydrating the woman, the mother. And in Chinese culture, you're definitely not supposed to drink ice water. It's generally frowned upon because it's ice, and so therefore it takes your body additional energy to heat it up. And so at postpartum, you're not supposed to drink ice water. And I remember when I was postpartum at a Northern California Children's Hospital, they offered me water and with or without ice. I was like, oh my gosh, they must have a lot of Asian/Chinese people come through, because I was like, yes, no ice, please. But yeah.
Yeah, I have to say my wife did not understand that either. When my parents came, they actually moved here for my last daughter being born, so they were here. And my mom's like, you need to, drink hot water, stay away from ice water.
I think something as similar as ginger, right? I think my wife and my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, doesn't allow us to take any ginger related things at night, because ginger is supposed to be not good at you in Chinese medicine for you to eat at night. It's good for you to eat in the morning. So that's something that, a lot of times how I use ginger, even though I grew up with my mom and dad, is that when I have a stomach problem where I feel like my stomach is not feeling good, usually when I drink something related to ginger, it helps me feel good regardless if it's at night in the morning. So I think that's something also just those little details are very, very interesting. Yeah. And then you're not supposed to take a shower after postmortem. So usually you have to wait until a month before you could take a shower. So which is in my culture really interesting. But a lot of my mom would say oh, if your wife gets pregnant after pregnancy and giving birth, you make sure that your wife doesn't take a shower and stuff like that, because it's supposed to like be bad for your body as your body is trying to like recover from the giving the birth and stuff like that. So
Interesting. So again, it's just important to ask, because there's no way we can know all of these details or remember, right? And it could be individual from family to family. Now, what about death? Are there commonly held beliefs about death amongst Chinese people? And is there anything that provides meaning in death to a Chinese person or their family?
Yeah, I don't know how much is common. I can tell you at least the traditions among my family, which are Southern China, which is, it's very important to kind of have a send-off for your family member, which includes burning things. And it's actually burning representation of material items. So burning, clay money in order to give them fortune in the afterlife, burning, a house for which they should live in. And then you sort of follow up that initial process with a very routine, at minimum annual visiting of that person at their grave and having a meal at their grave with them. And offering them a meal, and that your ancestors eat first. And then you give them a prayer and you light incense for them. And that happens routinely. So those are some traditions around death, at least in my Chinese culture.
So very much honoring of the ancestries and making sure they're cared for in the afterlife.
Yep. And if I know for me, we did it every Chinese New Year. We had this huge table set with the red tablecloth, their pictures and their names, and then this huge elaborate dinner. And you're not allowed to touch it. It's there, and you make offerings, and you burn all these kind of like paper money, paper houses. I probably spent hours making the Chinese money growing up, and to burn to our ancestors. So we did that for, I think, 20, 30 years as I was growing up. And you invite, we opened all the windows and doors at Chinese New Year to invite our ancestors in to come join us. I know we do that for my grandparents right now. Or at least my uncle in Korea is doing that for my grandmother and grandfather. And he has this altar that's set up. And then after the holidays, he just has this little altar box. I guess it's almost like a memory box, but it has their pictures and the incense burning, and you kind of say hi to them every morning.
So I had a conversation with a Chinese journalist one day, and I asked him that same question, and I asked him what would bring meaning in death to a Chinese person. And he also mentioned the honor, that honor is a very powerful and important thing to Chinese people. Would you agree with that, or what's your perspective on that?
yeah, I think honor and respect is a big thing. I think, just talking about my experience when I was still in the organ and tissue donation world, we had a family that was really hesitant to be an organ and tissue donor. And I think everyone assumes, because they're Chinese, it's just that mindset that because they're Chinese, they're not going to say no, and that's not it. And I think it's because they had a tradition where after someone officially passed away, and they assume when someone's brain dead and they still have a ventilator, their chest and the heart is beating, they don't consider that still passing away yet. That they always do like an honor and prayer after that fact. So I remember that case, what we realized is that we asked questions like Haiti was saying, and they said they have that tradition. So after the organ recovery, actually brought the patient back into the ICU room, after the organ recovery, and every family members actually surrounded the patient and prayed and paid respect to them. And I think that was what they were concerned about. They didn't think that after the organ recovery, they will be able to do that. And we were able to facilitate that. And that meant a lot to them because that was showing respect and honor to, that patient that just, passed away. So.
Mhm. I kind of along those same lines, Charles, I had asked that Chinese journalist, because he also mentioned that if you die being a hero, that's a big thing. And so I said to him, when it comes to organ donation, if we kind of talk about with a family and explain that we very much see donors as heroes because they are saving somebody else's life, and that we very much honor that through a lot of different events in remembering their loved one, would that be something that would help in that conversation? And he said, absolutely. Is that something that you would agree with, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would. I think just like death is just a very controversial topic, I think, in the Chinese culture. I remember when I started my career in Oriental Nation, I didn't mention it to any of my family members because it was just so close to death, and I had to deal with death every day.
Yeah.
I remember my uncle gave me this jade bracelet that I still wear till this day. And it's because my uncle said, "Oh, you're working with death.
Yeah.
That's going to help you with, the spirits. They're not going to come to you. It's going to help and protect you and everything." So it took me a while before I told any of my family members that I worked in the organ and tissue donation and industry, because it was just so controversial. So I think that's a big aspect. I think focusing on what's the positive and honoring their loved one and paying respect is such a big thing that they'll realize that that is a big part of donation. And I think a lot of times they're just scared. A lot of Chinese culture is scared that if the body's not whole, it wouldn't go through the afterlife and everything, but they're not aware that if they become a hero, they could also go to heaven, and they don't have to worry about that part of not having like any of your body parts, I think, in the afterlife. And I think that's the biggest concerns that a lot of Chinese families that I have had experience with when I work with them as donor families, that they usually have. And if you focus on the honoring and being a hero, that does make a big difference. Yeah.
That's all been very, very helpful and insightful. Kind of switching a little bit gears back away from healthcare in general. Are there times, and in what ways do you think someone might misunderstand a Chinese person?
That's a big one that I've seen with my parents. I guess it's part of that model minority thing, in that they're they don't want to cause conflict. So they're always nodding, not necessarily that, yes, that they were wrong, but nodding, okay, we understand what you're trying to say. But they're always smiling. They're like, yes, okay. I know, I remember when I was a kid, some police officers were like, "Do you think this is funny?" And I was really pissed off about that. I'm like, they're not laughing at you. It's them trying to show you respect and that they understand. I think that's a huge thing that that I've seen over the years, and still kind of see, especially when I deal with Chinese people who may not understand very well, and the doctors are trying to speak to them, or other people are speaking to them, especially when I go to a Chinese restaurant, and people are like, "This isn't funny, like this," whatever they're complaining about. I'm like, they're not laughing at you. I think that's a big part that I want everyone to understand, is that it's a respect thing. It's not that them laughing or they don't think it's funny. It's just showing you respect.
That's a really good thing to know, and that you pointed that out. And also that you pointed out that nodding doesn't necessarily mean agreement or understanding, but maybe we need to ask to make sure what was understood.
They might be thinking. I know my parents and a lot of my uncles and aunties, whenever they're thinking and something sharing with them, they're thinking, oh, okay, like they're thinking in that way, and they're still trying to think of an answer or trying to interpret what you're trying to share with them. So I think, like you said, I think it's good to just confirm, does that nodding really means yes? I think one thing is eye contact too. I know my family members, when they speak with people, they try to not make eye contact, because in some of the Chinese culture that I know, it's considered disrespectful, especially when you're talking to someone that's more higher hierarchy with you, especially with physicians. So I know a lot of times they think when my family, they're not sharing eye contact, they get mad, like, why are you not being respectful? Because in the American culture, we're always taught to practice active listening, make sure that you have eye contact, right? But I think, like, in my family, and I think a lot of Chinese individuals that I know, their family says eye contact is, don't giving eye contact is actually considered respect, because they were just taught that you're not supposed to have direct eye contact with someone that's more hierarchy with you, or you respect. So I think that's something that's pretty interesting. It might not be for all Chinese cultures, but I know for most of the individuals I know, it does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and an important point, because that's also with several other cultures, but it's something that could easily lead to misunderstandings, right? When we hold people to expectations of our own culture, what we're familiar with, and we hold people to that expectation, and then we react to it versus maybe just kind of check and realize that maybe this is a cultural difference here that's happening. Yeah. All right, let's see. Are there certain principles that I should be aware of when I'm interacting with a Chinese person, like do's and don'ts?
I think this is pretty interesting. In the Chinese culture, you're supposed to be very, very sensitive of what you say in terms of giving comments, because in the Chinese culture, anything, because in American culture, it's very, very natural that if you see someone that has really good hair, or they have a really good pair of shoes, or, oh, your pair of shoes are great, or your hair looks amazing today. And it might be even for the American culture too, right? But I think especially for a Chinese culture, you're not supposed to give too much compliments unless it's like someone that you're very close with, or it might be your other half, or a spouse, or even a close family member. Because I know when I when I went back to China, I would just be very, very natural. If I see someone, I'll just let them know. Even like someone that I meet in a store. Oh, I love your shoes today, and then they'll be like, wait, what do you want from me? Like, what is this? Like, they'll just be very, very scared. So I think that's the same culture shock for my wife. My wife was actually born in China, and she didn't come here from 10 years now, but often when we're going to go shopping, a store associate will be like, oh, I love your shoes today. And my wife is like, wait, what does she want from me? She doesn't want anything from me, babe. She just really likes the shoes that you're wearing. So I think I know for me that happens a lot. And it was a culture shock for me when I went back to China. People thought that I was flirting with everyone I saw, but I wasn't. I just really liked their shoes and their hat that they were wearing.
So it's considered almost like a flirtation when you're being overly complimentary.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I think there's one, like, overall, I don't think there's a ton of things, but there is like one kind of like table manner thing that's pretty firm. So if you ever find yourself at a table with like a big Chinese family, that the first serving must be offered to like the eldest person. And there's always this kind of like Chinese politeness. They'll kind of like, no, and they'll say, offer it to the kids first, but they don't mean it.
Offer it to
like,
the oldest.
Everything always has to
or the guest. So if there's like
the guest,
the
or the
person
most
of honor.
senior person,
Yep.
every time.
And they'll say like, no, give it to the kids, and then you're like, no, like there's like, yes.
So like, if you ever have little kids with you, like make sure they don't go grabbing for it, because that'll immediately pass judgment down on your children.
So in that same vein, though, let's say I walk into a patient's room and there's a family. Would it be good practice for me to go up to the elder person first to greet them, and then everybody else in the room, or that would that not be the same?
I don't think so. Not in that situation. I think it still makes sense to kind of go to the patient first and then try to pick up on the patient's signal about who in the room is highly valued.
And food is actually a really big, I think, component of Chinese culture, and a way that I think families that might not verbally express love can really put a lot of importance on food and feeding as an expression of love. So Winnie's example of the table manners, I think, is like a really good one, because it's like you love the person in the place of honor the most, or they're the most important at the table. And then another handy tip is to finish your plate or eat a lot of food, because that means that you're a good guest and you're appreciative of all the love and labor that they have put into feeding you or preparing the food. So
Yeah.
That's good to know, because in some cultures it's the opposite. If you finish your plate, that means that you didn't have enough.
Yep.
So it's good to know that. Yeah. Charles, you were going to say something?
Yeah, but that's also interesting too. When it's Chinese New Year's, if there's dishes in the front, you're not supposed to finish all of it, because li li niao yu. So that means there's always something left, and that's the Chinese phrase for there's always going to be something left for you for the next year. So it also depends on like the situation too. And I think it's funny that Jojo brought that up about food being an express of love, but because I don't think I've ever said I love you, or my parents have ever said I love you to me, but I realized the way how they say if they love me is that, have you ate today yet?
Yeah.
Do you have enough food today for you? Do you have lunch or dinner yet?
Yes.
You always open, like me and my parents don't live
That's the
together
first
anymore,
thing they
but
ask.
whenever I
Yeah.
call them or they call me, have you ate dinner yet? Have you had lunch yet? That's their expression of saying I love you. I remember I was trying to do something so weird. I said I love you to my mom one time, and she just hung up on me. Like, it was just the weirdest thing ever, but because she didn't know what to do. It was awkward silent for like 1 minute, and then she hung up on me. But I that's interesting. If you want to I think just talking about just patient care, if you do have a Chinese family or a Chinese patient, going in and asking them, have you ate yet? That's showing your express that you care and you're respecting them, because I think that's how our parents and how we've been showing express of how we care and love our parents too. So
That's
I
really
always joke with my mom. It's quite paradoxical. She definitely shows me love by feeding me. And
yeah.
then with that, have you gained weight?
I was literally just going to
that.
say that, but you can't gain too much weight, because if you do,
Yes.
then that's also viewed negatively, and that's the first thing they will say to you the next time they see you in person.
Have you gained weight? Here, eat
Every
this.
time I go see my parents, they're like, "Did you gain weight?" And then they're like, "Eat here." and they're at the end of the day, like at the end of the meal, they're like, "You didn't eat enough. There's
Yes.
still food." I'm like,
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah. It's so crazy, yeah. My wife gets scared when my parents come over to visit us, because usually my mom will bring 5 bags of food over here, and we have to just make sure that if they're coming over, we don't buy any groceries, because we know that she's gonna like buy so much, and she just wants to feed us. So it's just the way how they express and show love, like Jojo says.
yeah, and like with food for us, like my family, our tradition at Chinese New Year is making dumplings. So we make like 450 dumplings. And they are definitely not easy to make. They're very labor intensive. So I think, like Joe said, if they're going through all this trouble to make these dumplings by hand, definitely eat and show that respect that you're full, and that yes, these are made out of love.
I mean, so I think this doesn't happen often, but it happens from time to time. And if there's like a gift of food, particularly from somebody of Chinese descent, like that is really saying something. it's really saying something about how much they honor and respect you if they sort of brought you, particularly if it was something that was handmade or homemade rather.
What about body language wise, other do's and don'ts? Charles, you kind of talked about eye contact. Are there certain things that we should be aware of when we're interacting with somebody who may be a little bit more traditional Chinese?
I would say, you know, when we talk about like empathy, some people use physical touch, right? A hand on the hand, a hand on the elbow, a hand on the knee. That's probably not going to be taken very well in Chinese culture. It's, you know, I think for many people, there's a plus or minus about whether or not that's a space invasion. But from a Chinese perspective, they're just very reserved in that physical manner, as Charles talked about, like, you know, there really aren't I love yous and there's not a lot of hugs. We're not hugged much as kids. But that's just the understanding of what we grow up in. And so physical contact can be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. So would you recommend kind of just being a little more conservative when you're interacting with somebody and picking up on their cues, kind of to see how comfortable do they seem to be versus just going with what we normally would do?
I think it's probably just a pretty tough skill. You know, where I've come at it from as like an intensive care unit doctor who also is like not a hugger, but sometimes has started to pick up on cues of people do need it. I'm always an asker. I always ask permission for anything. And I give them the opportunity to say no. So if I'm really emotionally getting from someone that maybe a hug would be helpful, sometimes I let them know. I say, I feel like that I really want to give you a hug to comfort you. Is that something you need or is that something you want? And they completely have the permission to say no, but I still express that I have that feeling of empathy for them.
That's a great tip. Excellent.
Yeah, that's a nicely phrased.
Yeah. I think also maybe even offering something if, you know, they're grieving or they're having something like, you know, I know we do this in American culture too, but like to show your, you know, like, you know, empathy, like, do you need a sip of water?
Yes.
Have you got some rest yet? Do you need a bite to eat? I know it's all about food and drink again, but they will see that as a way of you expressing to them that you care and you're showing empathy for them, rather than, you know, maybe like holding their hands, like when he says, or, you know, tapping their knees or something. That's their way of knowing that you're showing respect and you're caring for them.
That's good to know. So is there a question you wish I had asked before I get to my last question? Is there a question you wish I had asked that I didn't ask yet?
No, but I can come up with. You're very thorough as always.
Yeah, you're very thorough, Eddie.
Were you going to say something, Jojo?
Oh, just to piggyback off that with one more comment is I feel a lot of conflict with the cultural appropriation that's happening within the wellness and beauty industries of, you know, using things that are traditionally either Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine. And just like Charles said, like, you know, there's a need for that, but, you know, things like jade rollers and gua sha and all those things are now very in vogue because of the wellness industry. And, you know, it's a little bit painful to see that as a person who's ethnically and culturally Chinese originally, to see that and, you know, people making money profiting off of it. But yeah, that was just my last comment.
Can you expand upon that, why that is painful for you? In what way you see that as appropriation versus maybe it's nice that other people are starting to see the value of it?
Yeah, I think that the intersection of, the definition of cultural appropriation is a really complicated one that
Right.
I don't know if we have time to get into right now, but I think it's problematic when a person of a different culture is is benefiting, especially financially, from the wisdom of a different culture. And so I think that it is certainly good that that is being used. I think that that's definitely a positive. But knowing that this is, coming from knowing the origins of something is also really important.
So it feels a little bit like an exploitation
Yeah.
for financial gain for somebody else. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and I think particularly when you talk about the beauty and cosmetics industry and its or the skincare industry and its relationship with Asian women, it's almost in like an objectifying way, or very like just sort of homogeneously saying like I don't know how to say it. It's almost like this kind of pedestal type thing again, and like the creating a certain imagery of Asian women. And it's a wonderful asset that many Asian women have wonderful skin. It's not a universal either. Some of that is definitely skincare and products and practices, and a lot of it is lifestyle and health and those types of things. And so, while I don't think I'm very bothered by it a ton, I definitely see where Jojo's coming from. Yeah.
Let's end with, tell me one thing that you love most about your commonly shared cultural practices or values amongst Chinese people.
I'll go food.
Yeah.
I think for me, food.
Food is very important.
Yeah. Very important.
Very
So
important.
I think that's for all cultures, right? I think food is always
It always
such a way
comes
to,
up.
right? It's always such a great way to connect one another and to maybe connect interculturally too, right? I think like sharing food and showing your respect by sharing food. I know in my old job, I was known for always having a snack bag because I just want to make sure people were happy and they weren't hangry, right? Yeah, right. So I think for me, I think food is just I love that being part of something very, very, very interconnecting. Even though we said mainland China is so big, but when it comes to talking about food, I think anywhere from where you are in China, people just get excited, and it's just a great way to mingle and get to know each other.
Yeah. For me, so when I'm in Virginia, I have a family that adopted me. Was actually one of my paramedic students, her family. So we actually celebrate Chinese New Year with them. And we do this whole big thing. Some of them actually can make dumplings better than I can. But we've kind of added that with our family friends. We like our Chinese New Year celebration is usually about 40 people every year. And we make all these dishes. My parents have taught my family, our extended family and friends, all how to make these dishes. So they all know how to make these Chinese New Year dishes. And they come over early and, you make the dumplings, we do some preparation the night before, but everybody comes over early. They cook, a little bit of wine goes around. But it's an all-day celebration, and it's great. It's a big family thing. So and I love that all my friends have embraced that culture with me.
Sounds like a fun day. A great tradition to have. How about you, Winnie?
I was thinking back towards the whole, not verbalizing very outwardly like emotion or love or the kind of physical contact thing, which it could sound strange, right? That it's just not a very touchy-feely type culture. But in a lot of ways, I just, maybe it's because that's the way I've grown up that I sort of prefer that. I prefer the act, like showing the act through these acts of compassion and these acts of feeding. And in my mind, there's never any doubt, even though the words were not there or the hugs were not there, there was never any doubt. And that's because that's just the way that feelings and emotions were expressed, were through the actions and the efforts that got put into caring for you. So in a lot of ways, I'm grateful to that part of our culture, and I certainly don't mind it at all.
Kind of like the 5 love language, right? I don't know
Yeah,
if
I was
anyone
just
read
thinking
that
about the
book,
love
right?
languages. Yeah, love languages, like culturally in Chinese, is like gifts and acts of kindness. Yeah.
Correct.
May I?
Yes, please.
It's funny, Winnie, and I think there is definitely wisdom in what you just said, and I was just reflecting that personally, that was actually and getting back to like culture versus individual experience. That was a really difficult part of my childhood because I'm a very literal verbal person. And so like my love language is actually verbal expression of love. And so that actually was problematic in my childhood. But to Amy's question about things that I appreciate about the culture. So 2 things. One thing is perhaps that I missed when you guys were talking about parents moving in with you. I think the idea of a nuclear family living together as like single, just parent plus child is losing a lot of the ancient wisdom that multi-generational family structures actually have, and that some of that is like the built-in care that like now my parent who raised me is now moving in with me, and I'm going to care for them because they need it, and that's what they did for me. I think that I've really in my adulthood developed immense appreciation for that, and the fact that I cannot add my parents to my health insurance is just insane to me, and the fact that they need to be on their own health insurance. So like that, essentially Social Security wouldn't have to exist if we had this multi-generational care living model. And then the other thing I really appreciate is a little bit of like, I guess, traditional Chinese medicine and how it meshes with the culture, because there are many things that I could never explain with Western medicine that make a lot of sense in Chinese medicine, just as a person, physiologically things. And postpartum, for example, the postpartum practice of, I forget the name of it right now, but it's the postpartum practice of a couple of things that we talked about, like drinking lots of broths and soups and not showering and, staying confined, which I think objectively to the Westerner sounds crazy, but actually is based on a lot of traditional and ancient practice and really very restorative to the mother postpartum and recovering. And so my postpartum recovery was like amazing. And it was because my parents came and cooked lots of broths and soups for me and let me rest when I needed to. So
yeah, it's called Chao Yu. I know in
yeah,
my culture. Yeah. And then in China right now, they actually have those kind of specific like organization for it. So it's like a big thing that after postmortem, you will go to a Chao Yu center, and then someone will care for you for a month as you're trying to recover and everything. And like Jojo said, it's like just the best care ever. And it's like the mom is like, it's like a queen, and which they should be, right?
They
They just gone through like a 9 month of like craziness, right? So they should be queens. But yeah, so it's like a big thing now in China that they have Chao Yu Zhongsam, like centers for postmortems.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Right. Well, I learned a lot of new things. I really appreciate all of your insights, and just love that you were willing to share your time and share, what the ups and downs that you also have to deal with, the ignorances that you might experience, as well as the positives, and enlightening us in terms of what we should be aware of. I've just learned a tremendous amount, and I really appreciate your time. I think these are great learning opportunities for all of us, just to hear and have these conversations, right? I think that that's the biggest thing that really came out is we can't assume that everybody's going to agree and have the same perspective. And so it's important that we just ask and are willing to learn in that moment and not judge. It can be different than what we expect, and that's totally fine. But to be willing to ask and learn. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Heidi.